These are the two horses we have now. My horse Pistol is on the right and JR's horse Pete is on the left. We keep them separated in the pastures, so most of the time they can go in and out as they please. We leave the front gate open for Pistol, and Pete can go out the back gate of his stall. But there are times we want to keep them in their stalls. Last week I told you about two horses we had years ago that became escape artists. Houdinis, you might say. They were getting out of their stalls and we couldn't figure out how they were doing it because the latches on these gates are really hard to open. We were watching them one day and witnessed them in the act of escaping. They used their bottom lip and chin to open the latches. It might be a little hard to believe if we hadn't seen it with our own eyes, but JR and I can both attest to the fact of how those two horses escaped. That's what a witness does, testifies to something they saw happen. Well, down through the ages, people have questioned the accuracy of the Bible, especially the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Last week, we referenced the amount of evidence that had been found about Jesus, and this week we'll look at the eyewitnesses of the life he lived and those that saw him after his resurrection from death on the cross. The author of the Gospel of Luke was not an eyewitness himself, but he investigated the virgin birth, the sinless life, the miracles, the crucifixion, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And he found it all to be true. He tells us that he talked to actual eyewitnesses as well as looked at first-hand accounts written by other witnesses. And what he found aligned with the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and John, who were eyewitnesses. It's very possible that Luke spoke with those men along with the other apostles, with all the witnesses who saw Jesus before he was crucified. There were over 500 who saw him after he was resurrected. First to the women at the empty tomb, and then to two men, two believers, on the road to Emmaus. He appeared more than once to the apostles, and specifically to Thomas. One day he showed up to tell them where to put their nets for fishing, but he gave specific instructions to Peter. Before Jesus ascended to heaven on a cloud, he appeared to 500 witnesses at one time. And then the Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15:7 that Jesus appeared to James, the half-brother to Jesus. Now, James is a very important witness because he knew Jesus his whole life, but during the 3 years of Jesus' ministry, James was not a believer. But after seeing the resurrected Jesus with his own eyes, James believed and no longer identified himself as Jesus' brother, but as his servant. James was later killed when he would not renounce his belief in Jesus. I can't imagine willing to die for something you know is a lie. James' belief in Jesus was real because his resurrection was real. In the next verse, Paul says that he also saw the resurrected Jesus, and that encounter was so powerful it knocked Paul off his horse. So we have many eyewitnesses to the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. If you are a believer, you have been called to be a witness too. You might say you have been subpoenaed. Next week, I'll finish up with ways we may respond to being called.